Okay, Jacob, you are on.
Perfect. Thanks, Stephanie. And hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you all this afternoon. I'm just going to give me a second here to share my screen and we'll get going. All right. Is that coming through okay?
Yes, it's fine.
All right, perfect. So as Stephanie mentioned, the topic of this afternoon's webinar is intensive programs of instruction and accelerated instruction for students who are served through special education. We do have a recently published guidance document on this topic that was published to the TEA Special Education Policy and Guidance page earlier this month. We'll be talking about that, and I'll actually be stepping you through some of the content of that guide this afternoon. As Stephanie mentioned, I'm Jacob Klett, I'm your presenter for this afternoon's session. I'm the Director of Special Education Strategic Integration here at TEA, and I've had the opportunity over the last year or so to work with a variety of colleagues here in our agency, supporting local education agencies with guidance around the implementation of accelerated instruction requirements since the passage of House Bill 4545 in June of last year of 2021. So I'm really excited to be here today and share some new information with you about the resource that recently became available to support local education agency staff on the implementation of both accelerated instruction and also intensive programs of instruction, which was an existing statutory requirement. We'll talk a little bit more about that, and then specifically how these requirements can be effectively met while serving students who have disabilities and who have individualized education programs as well. My email address is here on the slide. It's jacob.klett@tea.texas.gov. Should you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me after today as well. All right, during the webinar, we will touch on a couple of agenda topics. We'll start by reviewing a little bit around the Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 104, which addresses accelerated instruction requirements. These are commissioner rules that recently went into effect based on the passage of HB 4545 last spring and the amendments that HB 4545 made to the Texas Education Code. However, the bulk of today's presentation will be focused on stepping you through a new guidance document that addresses considerations for intensive programs of instruction and accelerated instruction for students served through special education. And then we'll finally close out by showcasing some additional resources that are available on the TEA website to support local education agency staff and families around state accelerated instruction requirements. All right, so a couple things you should be able to walk away with today. So by the conclusion of our webinar, you should be able to locate and review the commissioner rules regarding accelerated instruction that are located in the Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 104. You will be able to locate and access the new guide, the intensive programs of instruction and accelerated instruction for students served through special education resource document. And you'll be able to access and utilize that guide to support students in your district or charter school who are served by special education and may require either or both of these plans, as well as locate additional TEA resources that you can use to support your teams regarding accelerated instruction. Before we really jump in, I just want to spend a minute here and step through some acronyms and terms that you'll hear throughout today's presentation. Know that often these topics are a bit of an alphabet soup. So just kind of wanted to step through a little bit about what you'll see in today's presentation, as well as the new resource document that was published as well. So just running down the list, references to AI in this context mean accelerated instruction. AI is commonly used when just referring to the general accelerated instruction requirement in the Texas Education Code. SAI specifically refers to supplemental accelerated instruction. This is one of the pathways that can be utilized to meet the AI requirement. Talk more about that in just a minute. ALC refers to the general requirement for accelerated learning committees, while of course ARD, ARD committee, which I'm sure many folks on this call, if not everyone, is familiar with this acronym already. This refers to admission, review, and dismissal committees. specific to students who are served by special education. There's also an acronym ALP. This is the Accelerated Learning Plan that delineates how accelerated instruction is to be delivered and sets parameters for that instruction. Of course, IEP is the Individualized Education Program for students who are served by special education. And finally, IPI refers to Intensive Program of Instruction, which is a Texas statutory requirement for all students who are not successful in one or more areas of the state assessment, and also applies for students who may be at risk of not graduating from high school. And we'll say more about that too. All right, so let's jump into a little background on Chapter 104 in the Texas Administrative Code that specifically addresses accelerated instruction. And as a kind of lead into that, I just want to say that HB 4545, which of course passed last spring in the 87th regular Texas legislative session, amended requirements in the Texas Education Code, or TEC, specifically section 280211 and TEC 280217. In response to these statutory amendments, rules related to the implementation of these requiremements were developed and became effective in 2022, and those can be located at TAC section 104.1001. There's actually going to be a link to that in the coming slides as well. All right, so you may be wondering what exactly these new commissioner rules located at TAC 104.1001 actually mean. These rules are intended to provide clarification and guidance to local education agencies regarding the implementation of statutory requirements established in the Texas Education Code. As a reminder, the rules do not replace or remove any of the requirements that are already established in statute. Specifically, the rules at Chapter 104 address accelerated instruction, modified teacher assignments, and accelerated learning committees. These rules were published as adopted in the Texas Register on June 3rd, and they became effective on June 9th of this year, 2022. Additionally, these rules clarify the definition of supplemental accelerated instruction, or SAI. And perhaps most importantly for the folks on today's call, these rules outline the requirements for ARD committees when they are required under statute to serve as accelerated learning committees for students who are served by special education when those students are not successful in certain state assessment instruments. And you'll notice down there in the lower right corner, there's a direct link that'll take you to the page where you can actually read the text of the rule if you're so inclined to do so. So just wanted to step through the ARD committee piece. The statute, Texas Education Code Statute 280211 does require that ARD committees serve as accelerated learning committees for students served by special education in all instances where an ALC is required to meet under the TEC requirement at section 280211. ARD committees must serve as the ALC for students who do not perform satisfactorily on a 3rd, 5th, 8th grade STAR assessment or STAR alternate 2 reading or math assessment. Additionally, the ARD committee must meet as a properly constituted ARD when they're required to serve as an ALC. And they are required to develop an accelerated learning plan, also in accordance with Texas Education Code at 280211. And in the course of doing that, the ARD committee is also responsible for determining the manner in which the student who's served by special education would participate in accelerated learning, including supplemental accelerated instruction, if that avenue is to be used to meet the AI requirement. A couple things to keep in mind here when we talk about properly constituted ARD in conjunction with the ALC requirement. The requirements for properly constituted ARD are described in also in Texas Administrative Code in Chapter 89, and those can be located at 89.1050. There's some additional requirements for ARD committees when they're serving as accelerated learning committees. Efforts do need to be taken by ARD committees when they're serving in this capacity to ensure parental participation in the process. In doing so, our committees, when serving as ALCs, should follow the specified requirements for parental participation outlined in Chapter 89.1050 in Section D, and also the Federal Code of Regulations at Chapter 34 CFR 300.322 that outline parental participation requirements related to special education. Additionally, our committees, when they're serving as ALCs, should be documenting their decisions regarding supplemental accelerated instruction. These need to be documented in writing, and they need to provide a copy of that to parents or guardians as either a supplemental attachment to the student's IEP, or they can also be described and outlined in the deliberations section of the IEP. And then further, the rules at Chapter 104 specify that a parent or guardian of a student served by special education has a dispute resolution mechanism available. In Chapter 89, that's located at 89.1150. That outlines the dispute resolution process to resolve any dispute between the parent and a public education agency, specifically related to special education requirements. These are things like identification, evaluation, educational placement of a student, or the provision of a free and appropriate public education. However, if a parent of a student served by special education does not agree with an art committee's decision when they're serving as an accelerated learning committee, and that disagreement is exclusively around the supplemental accelerated instruction, the content of an accelerated learning plan, the timeline for that, the number of meetings, that the student is expected to participate in per week to receive that supplemental instruction, things of that nature. Those types of disagreements can be surfaced through the required grievance policy that districts are required to stand up under the Texas Education Code in Section 280211. All districts are required to have this grievance policy in place regarding accelerated instruction, that is the area of disagreement, including disagreements for students who are served by special education. The parent is able to utilize that grievance policy, as would the parent of any student who has a concern in this area. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and jump into the guidance document that was recently published on the TEA Special Education Policy and Guidance page. This was published in June of 2022, and it's an updated guidance document that's intended to support LEA staff with decision-making and educational planning for students who are served by special education and also require accelerated instruction and/or intensive programs of instruction. So this is just an image of the guide, and just kind of step through what this is. So of course, over the past year, since the passage of House Bill 4545, the TEA has been working to publish guidance to support folks in the field, including a pretty extensive FAQ that includes guidance for serving students with disabilities. And then recently, to address new statutory requirements around accelerated instruction and existing requirements for developing intensive programs of instruction, which both require art committees to play specific roles or have certain responsibilities, the TEA has developed a new guidance document, which is pictured here. And this is intended to assist in establishing meaningful plans for students who are served by special education, and also ensure that both the requirements for accelerated instruction and IPI are met. This resource was published earlier this month in June. It's located again on the TEA Special Education Policy Guidance page. It does outline the purpose of each type of plan and the specific role of the ARD committee in the development of that plan. Also addresses planning considerations to ensure that students' IEPs are fully considered in relation to the requirements for both IPI and AI. It also includes some sample student scenarios regarding accelerated instruction and intensive programs of instruction that showcase what the interaction of these plans with the existing IEP can look like in practice. So what I'd like to do at this point is actually step through a bit of the guidance in the newly published resource, and then highlight a couple of the features as well. So let's just start with some content You'll notice on the upcoming slides that there is a page number indicated in the bottom right corner of the slide. This will tell you specifically where you can go within that resource to locate this information as well as additional information on these topics. So starting with the intensive program of instruction, this is a statutory requirement under TEC at section 280213. And an IPI is a program of instruction for any student in grades 3 through 12 who did not perform satisfactorily on a STAR 3 through 8 assessment, an EOC assessment, or a STAR alternate 2 assessment. This also applies for high school students who are at risk of not graduating within 4 years. An IPI is intended to enable a student to attain a standard of annual growth. And for those students who are served by special education, the standard of annual growth must be determined on the basis of that student's IEP. Now, TEC 280213, the statute around IPI, also indicates that where it's applicable, an IPI must carry out the purposes of accelerated instruction. It's important to note that accelerated instruction has actually been a term in our state statute for some time, even before HB 4545. With the amendments to the definition of accelerated instruction that were established by HB 4545 does create some additional considerations and implications for how an IPI would interact with the AI requirement, as well as how we consider these requirements in relation to a student's individualized education program. And we'll step through a bit of that shortly. It's also important to note that while the statute broadly outlines the requirements for IPI and the ARD Committee's responsibility in developing an IPI for learners who are served by special education, the statute actually doesn't provide discrete steps for creating this plan or this program of instruction. Here, this provides an opportunity for the ARD Committee to actually design an IPI that interacts really meaningfully with the student's existing IEP. Additionally, on page 4, you can find some information regarding accelerated instruction or AI. And just as a refresher here, these requirements do apply to any student who does not perform satisfactorily on a STAR 3 through 8 assessment, an EOC assessment, or STAR alternate 2 reading and math assessments in grades 3, 5, or 8. In terms of the goal for accelerated instruction for any student, and this does include our students who are served through special education disabilities, the goal is to enable that student to perform satisfactorily on the state assessment in the appropriate grade level by the conclusion of the school year. I wanted to showcase a decision matrix. This is located in the guide, and you can certainly spend a little bit of time with this as you'd like. But this decision matrix illustrates some different scenarios in which IPI and AI might be required. AI requirements do pertain to students in grades 3 through 8 who don't perform satisfactorily on an assessment instrument, specifically STAR, and students who do not perform satisfactorily on an EOC assessment would also require accelerated instruction. These AI requirements can be met through 2 options. These are the options that are outlined in statute. So I'm looking at the blue boxes there under accelerated instruction. And to meet those requirements, schools can do a couple of things. They can either assign the student to a master, exemplary, or recognized teacher in the subject area or areas where that student failed to pass the state assessment, or they can provide supplemental accelerated instruction to that student in the applicable subject areas. It's also important to note that students who don't pass a 3rd, 5th, or 8th grade reading or math assessment, that's both STAR and STAR alternate 2, do require an accelerated learning plan that must be developed by an accelerated learning committee or ALC. And then for a student who does not take a required state assessment, these AI requirements do also apply. So for those students who do not receive a score, the AI requirement does still apply for that student. Jumping over to IPI in the orange over on the left, the statutory requirements here are located in at Texas Education Code in section 280213. And these specify a couple things: that an IPI for student can carry out the purposes of accelerated instruction where applicable. And in fact, in many cases, the requirements for both intensive program of instruction and accelerated instruction will both apply. We'll step through some more guidance here that showcase how ARD committees can strategically develop IPIs in conjunction with these AI requirements, and that also support a student's IEP. Okay, so I'm going to step through now a table that's located on page 5 in the IPI and AI guidance document. And this really just steps through the purpose of each of these plans, and then also the roles and responsibilities of ARD committees in crafting these programs and plans. So of course, IPIs are intended to enable the student to perform at grade level at the conclusion of the next school term, or achieve a specified standard of growth. For students who do have IEPs, that standard of annual growth is determined on the basis of that IEP. Now, for accelerated instruction, the purpose of this law is to enable a student who does not perform satisfactorily on a state assessment to perform satisfactorily in that subject area by the conclusion of the next school year. A couple distinctions there. Next question asks to whom this requirement actually pertains. And so here we'll take a look at each of these requirements. So starting with IPI, this requirement pertains to any student in grades 3 through 12 who don't perform satisfactorily on STAR or STAR Alternate 2 assessment, and for those students who are not likely to receive their high school diploma before the 5th school year after enrollment in 9th grade. Jumping over to AI requirements, this pertains to students in grades 3 through 8 who do not perform satisfactorily on a STAR assessment. This also pertains to students in high school who do not perform satisfactorily on an EOC assessment. And then additionally, students who are eligible for the STAR Alternate 2 assessment do require an accelerated learning plan developed by an ALC if they are not successful in reading or math, specifically in grades 3, 5, or 8. ARD committees have some specific responsibilities in crafting both IPIs and determining accelerated instruction considerations for students. ARD committees, in thinking about AI, must determine the manner in which that student would engage in AI. ARD committees are also required to serve as accelerated learning committees for students with IEPs who don't perform satisfactorily on a 3rd, 5th, or 8th grade reading or math assessment in both STAR and STAR Alternate 2. And ARD committees, of course, must meet and must convene and develop the accelerated learning plan no later than the start of the next school year. And in terms of the IPI, kind of jumped over that, broadly, ARD committees are responsible for designing an IPI for a student who needs one if that student is served by special education. And the requirement there is fairly broad. Often we receive questions about how these plans are actually to be documented. And so just starting with IPI, the current law actually does not explicitly state this, how an IPI should be documented. You'll note here that we have published some recommended practices on page 7 of the guidance document. And then we'll actually step through those today too in this webinar. In terms of accelerated learning plans, there are some specific requirements regarding the documentation of those plans. So where an accelerated learning plan or an ALP is required, the accelerated learning committee is required to convene and create that plan. It must be documented in writing. As we recently just noted, for students who are served by special education, of course, the ARD committee is required to meet and serve as that ALC and develop this accelerated learning plan. To document that, the ARD committee can do that in one of two ways. They can either document it in the deliberation section of the student's IEP or document it as a supplemental attachment. These are also the requirements that we discussed at the top of today's webinar that are specified in Texas Administrative Code in Chapter 104. Efforts do need to be taken to ensure parental participation. As we also noted earlier, art committees should notify students, parent, or guardian about the time and place for convening an ALC, the purpose of that meeting, and then provide a copy of the accelerated learning plan, again, in one of those two methods, to the student's parent or guardian once that plan has been developed. And again, this information is located on page 5 in that recently published guidance document as well. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit now and jump into thinking about supplemental accelerated instruction and the requirements for supplemental accelerated instruction. Again, just to reiterate, this is one of two pathways that can be used to provide accelerated instruction to students who need accelerated instruction on the basis of their performance on state assessment. As a reminder, the other option that's available would be assignment of that student to a certified master exemplary or recognized teacher in the subject area where that student failed to perform satisfactorily. But assuming that supplemental accelerated instruction is the route that will be utilized to meet the student's needs, then it's important to note that this is a supplement to regular instruction. So as we're thinking about planning considerations, it's important to keep in mind that supplemental accelerated instruction is considered an extension of Tier 1 instruction that's provided to all students. This is an extension of the general curriculum and is not intended to be a special education service. There are a variety of different options that can be considered for planning purposes and determining how supplemental accelerated instruction or SAI will be provided. SAI can be provided either during school hours, before school hours, or after school hours, so long as it's offered at least once weekly. It can also be offered in full in the subsequent summer following the administration of the assessment where the student was not successful. And then additionally, SAI does have a minimum requirement of 30 hours per subject area. So it is certainly possible that a student may need to engage in supplemental accelerated instruction for more than one subject area if there is a need for such instruction based on the student's performance on the state assessment instrument. And then further, supplemental accelerated instruction is to be delivered in a 1-to-1 ratio or in a small group of no more than 3 students unless a parent waiver is obtained. Now, if a parent waiver is obtained to increase the size of the group, that's permissible under statute. However, that waiver needs to be completed and signed by the parent or guardian of each student who will be assigned to that SAI group in order to increase that group size beyond 3. Some additional requirements to consider as you're planning for supplemental accelerated instruction. The SAI does need to include targeted instruction in the essential knowledge and skills for the grade level and subject area where that student was not successful on the state assessment. And it also needs to be designed in such a way that it assists the student in achieving satisfactory performance on the subsequent assessment in that area by using effective instructional materials. These requirements are located on page 6 in that guide as well. So if you're wanting to go back and reference this, that is where you can locate that information. And then finally, SAI should be provided to students by a person who has received training in the use of the instructional materials that will be used to provide the instruction. And then, of course, to the extent possible, the supplemental accelerated instruction should be provided by the same person for the entirety of that supplemental instruction period. This is also located on page 6 in that guidance document. All right, we're going to shift now to looking at some recommended practices around developing an IPI. As I mentioned earlier, the statute located in Texas Education Code does not specify practices around documentation of an IPI or timelines. So what you'll find on page 7 of the recently published guidance document are recommended practices for developing an IPI with consideration to the new accelerated instruction requirements that went into effect with HB 4545, and then also specifically in this guidance document, what that looks like and what that means for a student who's served by special education. Of course, IPI is required when a student is not successful on a 3 through 12 state assessment instrument, or if that student's at risk of not graduating within 4 years. And it can also carry out the purposes of accelerated instruction where it's applicable. So in terms of some recommendations here, it's recommended that ARD committees create an IPI for a student as soon as possible, as soon as they learn that a student was not successful in at least one area of the state assessment or possibly more. It's recommended that ARD committees hold a properly constituted ARD committee and consider how they will develop that student's IPI, including input from the student's parent or guardian, and that IPI really be designed based on the result of the assessment instruments. In doing so, the ARD committee should describe what will be provided to the student to address their areas of need, and it should address each area. So if the student was not successful on multiple areas of the state assessment, then the IPI should be designed to support those areas of need. Additionally, and ARD committees are developing an intensive program of instruction for a student. It's recommended that in developing this program of instruction, they really think about the frequency, duration, and location where these instructional services will be provided, as well as who will be providing them as they're carrying out that plan. They should be thinking about the target area or areas for acceleration, as well as the goals that the student will be working toward in order to know whether the student has achieved satisfactory growth and progress in that area. And then also include how that student's progress will be monitored toward the attainment of those goals, and who's actually responsible for collecting and reporting that data to the student's parent or guardian, and then keep evidence of this progress monitoring on hand in the student's file. It's important to remember that an IPI is an ongoing support in the case where the student has not been successful on a state assessment instrument or is at risk of not graduating. Accordingly, that program of instruction should be revisited and updated as needed based on the student's performance on the next administration of the STAR. And then additionally, the IPI should be documented in writing. It is recommended that this be done in the deliberation section of the IEP or as a supplemental attachment to be consistent with requirements for the documentation of accelerated learning plans. And in all cases, it's important to ensure that the parent or the guardian of the student be provided with a copy of the student's IPI, as well as any amendments to the student's IPI that have been put into place to support their growth toward or their achievement of specific learning targets. All right, so shifting from IPI into accelerated learning plans, these accelerated learning plans are those that require an ALC, and again, that's the Accelerated Learning Committee. And these document accelerated instruction decisions for students in each area where accelerated instruction is required on the basis of that student's performance on a state assessment. The ALP should include decisions about AI or accelerated instruction that address how specific grade level TEKS will be addressed, if SAI is to be delivered, supplemental accelerated instruction, ensure that the period of time that supplemental instruction is to be delivered is actually useful for that student. This may include in some instances providing instruction above the minimum requirement of 30 hours for some students on the basis of their needs. Now, once an ALP has been established, the ARD committee, when they're serving as an accelerated learning committee, should maintain appropriate documentation related to the implementation of that ALP, including supplemental accelerated instruction or tutoring attendance logs, also minutes of any meetings related to that ALP, notices of ALC notices and communication between the school and the parent or guardian of that student, as well as, of course, progress monitoring data related to how that student is progressing during the supplemental accelerated instruction period. An important note here, some students who receive special education related services in a homebound setting may be eligible to receive accelerated instruction on the basis of their state assessment performance. In these circumstances, our committees, when they're required to serve as the ALC for students who are receiving homebound services, should prioritize the health and safety of the student. In some cases, that may actually require the pausing of AI delivery until such a time that that student can sustain more prolonged participation in instruction, or perhaps even engage in accelerated instruction remotely. For more information here and to see this information again, you can locate this on page 8 in the IPI and AI for students served through special education guidance document. All right, page 8 of that guidance document outlines some recommended practices for ARD committees when they're developing both intensive programs of instruction as well as making determinations about accelerated instruction. To the extent possible, ARD committees should minimize issues by scheduling a meeting to address requirements of IPI and AI at the same time. If summer school is going to be used to provide SAI or supplemental accelerated instruction to a student, ARD committees should plan to hold ALC meetings during the school year before the summer and after STAR scores are available to ensure the summer programming is designed to meet that student's specific needs related to accelerated instruction. Where accelerated instruction requirements are going to be met by providing that student or assigning that student to a certified master, exemplary, or recognized teacher, and that student's parent or guardian has indicated a request for a specific teacher, they should hold a meeting in the summer to address those parental requests and ensure that staffing and scheduling can be done accordingly in preparation for the coming school year. And then finally, wherever possible, ARD committees should convene to develop a student's annual IEP simultaneously with an accelerated learning plan and an intensive program of instruction, of course, with consideration to the IEP timeline for each individual student, and certainly recognize that in some cases that may not be possible, but where it is, do recommend that these plans be considered together in order to ensure the student has a streamlined educational experience and these plans can work in conjunction with each other. I just want to highlight a couple further features of the IPI and AI guidance document at this time. So in addition to the guidance that we stepped through in the course of today's presentation, you can also find some examples and non-examples of interactions between the state accelerated instruction requirements and intensive program of instruction requirements with the student's IEP, as well as several sample student scenarios. And these sample student scenarios do illustrate how some of these practices can be applied, including thinking about how accelerated instruction requirements interact with intensive programs of instruction, and then how those are considered relative to the needs of a student who has an IEP. And then before we close out for the day, I'd also like to just share with you where you can find some additional resources related to accelerated instruction on the TEA webpage. Okay, so the URL in the upper right corner of this slide is a page where you can find TEA's accelerated learning resources. You can also scan the QR code on the bottom right of the slide on your mobile device as well, and that'll take you right to this page. The accelerated instruction resources page includes a variety of planning documents. This includes sample ALC plans, data collection forms, and templates, as well as resources that have been developed by local education agencies to support the implementation of accelerated learning requirements. And then finally, just thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join today's webinar. We certainly appreciate you joining us and hope that the content of today's session and the new accelerated instruction and IPI guidance document helps you and assists you in your planning to support students. If you should have any follow-up questions, you're welcome to reach out. There's a couple email addresses here, just want to call your attention to. You can email accelerated.instruction@tea.texas.gov. Should you have any questions related to accelerated instruction requirements, and you can also email special.education@tea.texas.gov should you have questions related to specific requirements for students with disabilities who are served by special education. And with that, again, just really appreciate your time this afternoon. And I believe these materials will soon be available for viewing and access after today's session on the same page where you joined today's webinar. So with that, Stephanie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I appreciate it. There were some questions in the Q&A, but most people just wanted the link to the guidance document. I dropped it in there, but as Jacob said, it's also going to be posted on the webpage where you access this webinar. So either place you can grab it from. And this webinar was recorded, so you can also access the recording on that same webpage in just a few days. So thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time. And as a reminder, our next webinar will be July 14th. Thank you.